Hello.
Hello.
Right, I'm with Miss Calver, our resident expert historian, and today we're going to be discussing some of the contextual stuff around Casablanca to do with the Second World War and particularly the European countries during the war. So shall we get straight into it?
Mm-hmm.
Let's start with Germany. So Germany is represented as General Strasser in Casablanca. Could you just give us like an outline, Miss Calver, of sort of like German policy and sort of Nazi ideals and things like that?
Sure. Okay, so Hitler comes into power in 1933, and straight away he enacts his policies of dictatorship, obviously, and then the foreign policy was Lebensraum, which is called living space. So his whole idea was to invade Europe, create room for Germans, and then create a German empire. He was especially interested in creating an empire with German-speaking individuals. He thought they should all be together. Nazi ideals alongside that were that you were white, you were Protestant ideally, and you were not of the Jewish race or religion. It's a bit of a misconception to say blonde hair, blue eyes, but they did want, the white race basically. That's what they wanted in people. Okay,
cool. Let's go to Laszlo, who is the Czech Republic, or the Czechoslovakian resistance fighter. What were the issues with Germany and the Czechs? Like what was the relationship like between those two countries?
Sure, well not great basically.
You surprised me!
Yeah, I know, the Germans, not nice. Well, they'd already begun their process of invasions. And they went into Czechoslovakia in 1938. And they took this little bit of Czechoslovakia, it looks to us like on the top end, but they called it Sudetenland, the southern bit of Czechoslovakia. And Germany invaded that in 1938. And the whole of Europe was a bit in uproar at that, because Czechoslovakia did not want it. The reason he did it was because previously he'd invaded Austria and got a great reception. People out on the streets clapping and cheering, they wanted that Anschluss, that union with Germany. The Czechs did not want that union with Germany, and they were quite brutal to the Czechs, and that got even worse during the war because they were responsible for the murder of one of the Nazis, Heydrich. And so the Nazis took it out on the Czech Republic people and blamed them for this murder. And there's a brutal Ludici, I think is how you pronounce it, massacre, where they killed nearly 190 men straight away. And then they sent away 190 women and children to be gassed to death, just because they were somehow linked to this murder of this Nazi.
So they wiped our village in response to...
and that's happened a few times in Czechoslovakia. So the relationship was very, very strained right from the start.
Let's move on to Norway, who in the movie is represented by Ilsa, who's the sort of love interest in the movie. Can you, again, Germany and Norway and the relationship between those countries?
Yeah, sure. Norway, I feel really sorry for Norway, bless them. All they wanted to do was stay neutral. That's all they wanted, right? They had a neutral government, neutrality acts, pacifism was their way, and then it all went downhill basically. And the Brits are to blame for that, to be honest.
Oh, why is that?
Because we decided that we wanted the iron that was in Sweden to help with the war effort. So we decided to invade Norway to get to Sweden. Somehow that plan got leaked to the Germans and they thought, we're going to get in there first. So we were arguing with the French about when to invade, as you do, and whilst we were arguing, the Germans invaded Norway. And so they jumped in on the 9th of April, 1940, and they took over Norway until the end of the war. Their reasons were the same as ours, to be honest. They wanted to spread the empire, but they also wanted the iron access. And then Norway were under Nazi rules, Nazi occupation, and again, resistance movements would have started, but on the whole, Norway were consumed by Nazis.
Moving on to sort of a more minor character called Carl, who is one of the bartenders and sort of waiters at Rick's Cafe. He's Dutch. So the relationship again between the Nazis and the Dutch.
So again, Netherlands was invaded quite early on, and it only took one day to take over the Netherlands, so the resistance doesn't seem to be huge. And in fact, it seems like they collaborated with the Nazis quite a lot in that country. The stats show 70% of all the Jews in the Netherlands were killed. So there must have been that element of cooperation and collaboration. And again, they were under Nazi rule, and they followed all the Nazi ideals, and so concentration camps and deportations. Again, resistance movements don't seem to be huge in the Netherlands. It seems to be a case of people would hide Jewish friends and family, but they wouldn't resist the Nazis in huge groups like we've seen in other areas.
So, am I right in thinking that actually, because of that, it's quite bloodthirsty in the Netherlands during this period? If there's lots of people being deported to be killed, it's quite a lot of bloodshed there.
Yeah.
Was there a lot of conflict there as well?
There were some bombings, but I don't think it's flattened in the same way that France and Britain were. And that's, of course, where Anne Frank was hiding out for most of the war as well.
So one of the most interesting and complex characters is Captain Renaud, who is the French chief of police. It's quite a complicated relationship that Germany and France have during the Second World War.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they've always had beef with each other. They share a huge border.
Yeah.
And basically, since World War I, they've been at each other's necks to claim back land. France gained a lot of land from Germany at the end of World War I. Germany wants to claim that land back. France wants to put army soldiers on the border to prevent that. Germany wants it demilitarised. So all of this is going on in the 1920s.
Right, in the build-up.
Yeah, and in the 1930s.
Okay.
And then, of course, Hitler comes into power, and he's all about tearing up the Treaty of Versailles, and that means taking back everything that France took. So France is probably their main target in their expansion plans.
Okay. And in terms of invasion, what happened? Because they were conquered effectively by the Germans quite early on in the war.
Yeah, in the spring of 1940.
1940. So what happened to France after that point?
So the top half of France and a little bit of the west coast is under German rule. And again, all the Nazi ideals apply against Jewish people. But the bottom half of France remains called a free zone. So it's a bit half and half France, and it is quite a complicated relationship.
Is there, what's the reason for that? Do you know? Like, why was it split like that?
They just couldn't conquer the south.
Okay.
There's a bit of natural geography in the way as well, forest areas which Netherlands didn't have, so they couldn't protect themselves. France has got a lot of that in the middle area. I forget what the area is called, but also it's so big, so vast, and they didn't need that bit. Because Spain weren't involved, they're having their own civil war, and that would have been the only real benefit to them taking that area of France.
And I guess Paris is in that northern bit, right?
Yeah, and they want France so they can access Britain. So that's their aim after France.
Okay.
And then the government they set up is called the Vichy government, and they have to do what the Germans tell them, basically. So again, huge collaboration with the French and the Germans once that's happened.
But then what's different about France is that it's like there's a literal split in the country between people still fighting the Germans
and
people collaborating with them. So it's sort of, with all the others that we've just talked about, it's sort of like it's assumed that they've been occupied and they're all collaborating with a tiny resistance cell, but France is more split than that.
Yeah, it's more blatant than that. And
a really minor character, to be honest, so we don't really need to talk about it in too much detail, is Sasha, who is Russian. Talk to me about Russia and Germany.
Okay. Well, they certainly weren't a minor character in World War II, so that's interesting. Now, Russia they were fooled by the Germans. Again, a little bit of pity on them. Stalin signs a non-aggression pact with Hitler in 1938, and they agree in 1939. Yeah, literally. And then Hitler, a couple of years into the war, decides, I'll have Russia, actually. And they invade Russia, Operation Barbarossa. Takes them a while, and they don't actually get anywhere. You might have heard of the Battle of Stalingrad and the Siege of Leningrad. Both of those were failures for the Germans, but they don't accept that until 1943, when they retreat, and that's when Russia formally comes onto the Allied side.
Okay. It just sprung to me then, there must be, because Russia, the downfall of Nazi Germany is probably, a huge part of that is probably down to the invasion of Russia and the failure of it. So you would expect in this sort of like allegory, a Russian character to be quite substantial, right? But could it be something to do with the fact that, Casablanca is a Hollywood movie, and the American relationship with Russia is a bit tricky.
Yeah, I reckon so, actually.
Because they have, at this point, is there sort of a fear of communism and that sort of...
What year's the film made?
1942.
Yes.
Right, so that might be why.
Yeah,
like they're
100%.
a minor part of the...
That's interesting that, yeah, they haven't made more of that, because if the Russians hadn't been fighting the Germans, the war would have gone on a lot longer. The Russians were the first ones to reach Berlin.
Yeah, so you would expect them to play a bigger role in this movie.
I mean,
so last but not least, we'll move on to America. And when it's not so much the relationship with Germany that we're interested in, it's more how their foreign policy changed over time and the reasons for that.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So with America, it changes according to whoever's president. So that's the problem. There's never a consistent policy. After World War I, they entered isolationism, and that's with Wilson and Coolidge, and they both said never to go to war again. They signed a pact called the Kellogg-Briand Pact, not the cereal, but you might remember it as such, with loads of other countries promising never, ever, ever to go to war again. 1928, great idea. Then the Wall Street crash happened, and everyone sort of forgot that promise. But American foreign policy remained isolationist. In the 1930s, they had loads of neutrality acts saying we're not going to go to war, we're not going to help people. Slowly but surely they started breaking those acts as Britain and France became involved in World War II.
So what were the predominant reasons why they wanted to isolate themselves from conflict? I mean, the obvious reason is like war is bad, but
I don't think that was their reason, actually.
Yeah, but like, because America historically is quite a bloodthirsty country anyway.
Yeah.
Like, what were the reasons why they were just enclosing themselves off from their allies?
They genuinely thought it's nothing to do with us, it's far away.
Right.
So there was that theory. There was public opposition. They hadn't lost that many men in perspective of the population in World War I. It was around 100,000 men that they lost, but still that was enough for the public to say we don't want to lose any more men to a European conflict that's nothing to do with us. So it was just the opposition to Europe, to be honest.
So during the 20s and 30s, a real anti-conflict, and that starts to change.
Yeah.
What are the main reasons why it fully changed?
They needed money.
Okay.
Again, it's all the Wall Street crash. This impacts so many things. America was destitute, basically. They tried all these schemes to get jobs going, but it wasn't working. 1938, unemployment was rising again. So they needed to make weapons to sell to Europe to get them out of depression. So that was their main incentive. And in fact, they were supplying about 50% of the weapons used in World War II by 1940. And they're not even involved in the war by then.
Okay.
And they started breaking their own neutrality acts by selling us and France weapons in that manner.
Okay. And then finally, what was the thing that made America change its mind completely? So it seems like this to be a steady sort of decline into the conflict.
Yeah.
What was the major event that caused that to happen?
That would be Pearl Harbor,
Okay.
definitely. Again, that's an attack by Japan, so you might not think, well, why is Germany involved? Japan and Germany are allies, and America declared war on Japan the day after Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
And then I think it was 3 days later, so it's the 8th they declared war, 8th of December. The 11th of December, Germany and Italy declared war on America.
Okay.
So that's how America became involved. They didn't actually declare war on Germany, it's the other way around, and then they had to declare war back in order to begin sending troops and all of that.
Okay. So that's interesting because in Casablanca, Rick is the like embodiment of America, and he starts the movie by saying, "I stick my neck out for no one," and then by the end, he ends up helping every other European character.
That sounds likely. Yeah.
So it's sort of
Does he make money out of that?
Well, he has everyone comes to his cafe.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. That's
so
what
I think
it's about.
there's a metaphor definitely working there.
Yeah.
And as a piece of cinema at this time, so when was Pearl Harbor?
December 1941, the 7th.
So it was round about the same time of America joining the war that this film was released.
And maybe they're trying to persuade people in America this is the reason, right?
I think this is a really simple allegory for why they should do that. Okay, so there is how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different countries in there. And their foreign policies and their relationships in the lead up and including World War II. Thanks again to Miss Calver.
That's okay.
You've done us a sterling job, and thank you very much.
That's all right.
See you again soon.
Bye.